Welcome to Dark Facade, a channel dedicated to looking past the veneer of humanity and finding its true face. I will be your tour guide down this winding path of tales, ranging from the supernatural, science fiction, and twisted love. All the stories you're about to hear are assorted bits of literature that will range from the bizarre to the unexpected. So sit back, lower the lights, and allow yourself to be taken away from everyday reality to its shadowy reflection. If you enjoy our unusual content, please be sure to hit the like and subscribe button to receive more. Thank you. The Book of Dark Names by Katie Rogers, read by Katie Rogers. Chapter 6. Margaret Griffin had been one of the richest women on the planet. She had started out in broadcasting, like most in the business, at a local news station. Her charming personality and uncanny ability to come across as relatable gave her just the advantage she needed to put her on the top. Over time, she had managed to climb the ladder of success to become a household name. Not only did she have her own news networks, two to be exact, she also had a magazine. Life had been good to the Lady in the Know, which is what she had been christened back in the 1990s. She had it all: looks, brains, and wealth, the complete total package. Perhaps that was why the news of her horrible death at the hands of her husband came as such a shock. Dr. Chang Lee was her second marriage, and one that she herself had described as ideal. The grisly details of her murder had become front-page news and was the topic of conversation on every talk show and media outlet. Margaret had been bound and gagged by her beloved, then placed in the bathtub. He had slit her open from sternum to groin, then removed all her organs, including her brain. A neighbor had called the police when they heard Lee screaming in horror outside of the couple's mansion. When officers arrived, they found the surgeon coated in blood and crouched down on the ground in the garden with his arms wrapped tightly around his body. He was staring in abject horror at a blood-covered object a few feet away from him. Police later learned that the object was none other than the very cursed Aiwass hook. The instrument itself was used in the mummification process to remove the brain. The Aiwass hook, however, was said to be cursed by an entity that would take possession of any who owned it. They would commit acts of violence or murder and claim that it was not their own doing but something dark attached to the instrument. This is what Dr. Lee had told the authorities the night they had brought him in and charged him with the murder of his wife. Ron Kaplan, the detective on the case, scoffed at the doctor's ramblings. His cynicism led him to believe that the surgeon was trying to get an insanity plea. That's what he thought, until he had his own experience with the hook. He had noticed the strange text on the end and took it out of the evidence bag to get a better look. The next thing he knew, he felt a sharp pain in his hand and heard a distinct growl, followed by a hiss. There was a sound of something falling to the floor with a thump as he watched his daughter's cat run out of the room like a shot. He noticed his hand was a mangled mess, and the Aiwass hook was on the floor. The worst part, however, was the look of sheer terror on his wife's face from the doorway. She had seen the whole thing and filled him in on the details later after she had calmed down. The murders of Hammond, Lawrence, and Cooper were all national news. Some of the details that the police had wanted to keep under wraps managed to make it to the headlines. The one that stood out to Kaplan was the use of cursed objects. The other was that his ex-partner Akaike was handling the cases. The next day, he gave his old friend a call. He met with Sean and some of his colleagues from Chicago to talk about and compare their cases. They came to the conclusion that they were in fact linked and possibly carried out by a group and not an individual. Once Evelyn and Sean had some time alone on the crime scene, they confirmed it. Ron was one of the few people who knew about Kai-Kei's gift. They had gone through the academy together and made detective around the same time. The bond two people form when working so close together for as many hours as their job demanded is like an extension to your family. So when Sean let his secret slip out one night in a drunken confession, Kaplan just laughed it off. The laughter stopped when his partner revealed a private conversation Ron had with his mother over the phone after his father had died. Since that night, Kaplan kept Sean's secret and never treated him differently. A deep sigh escaped the detective as he saw him and his small assembly come in from the parking lot. The captain had just informed Kaplan he was to give the crew his full cooperation. He could tell by the slight irritation in her voice she wasn't happy about it, but he also knew her orders had been handed down by the police chief. When he learned Christopher Harris was a member of said group, he was certain the Morans were behind it. Even though he was glad to have Sean's assistance, he wasn't crazy about the rest. Orders were orders, however, so he would grin and bear it. Everyone was led to a room where they could be briefed about the case and the evidence that they had so far. Before Kaplan had a chance to head back to meet them, he was stopped by his partner, Lynn Becker. "We just got word from the jail. Lee is dead," she said flatly. "What? How?" he gasped. He swallowed his own tongue. "You've got to be kidding me," he exclaimed in bewilderment. "The weirdest part is, it happened while he was talking to a visitor. The officer on duty said Lee acted as if he didn't know the guy. They spoke for maybe a few minutes, and then Lee started choking. Before anyone could do anything to help him, he was dead. When the guard looked back over towards the visitor window, the man was gone," Becker told him. "How the hell did he get out so quickly? No one tried to stop him? No one saw him leave. That's impossible. He would have had to have checked out," Kaplan argued. "He didn't, though, and there's no sign of him doing so on the security camera either." "Then he still has to be there. They need to look." "They have, Ron. He isn't," Lynn replied calmly. Kaplan let out a huge sigh of exasperation. Ever since they started their investigation, he had felt uneasy. Some might try to explain it away because of the extremely grotesque nature of the crime, but he was a seasoned detective. He'd seen plenty of horror in his day. The incident with the family cat had done nothing to squelch his fear. Now this weird suicide, if indeed that's what it was, made things even more bizarre. "So did this strange visitor happen to sign in?" he asked. "He did. His name is Nigel Rashad, and yes, I'm having him brought in for questioning," Becker concluded with a grin. Ron chuckled at her abrupt way of letting him know she was on top of it. "One more thing. Before Lee went out to see this guy, he was writing a letter. Take a look." Kaplan did a quick scan of the contents, then met his partner's intrigued gaze. "Has anyone else seen this?" he whispered. "Not so far," she told him. "Come with me," he said, then led her down the hallway to the briefing room where everyone was waiting for them. They agreed she would go in and start briefing the group on what they needed to know while he discussed their latest find with a Kai-Kei. His old partner came into the hallway wearing a look of intense curiosity. "Here, read this," Ron said, handing the letter over to him. Sean quickly read it, then calmly folded it in half. "Did they find this in his cell?" he asked. "That's right," Kaplan nodded. "If there's any truth to this, we've got one hell of a motive, not to mention the link that ties all these murders together," he declared. "Yes, but you're forgetting one thing," Ron cautioned. "What's that?" Sean shrugged. "This letter implicates some very rich and powerful people in some serious human rights violations. All but one of them are dead, and her kid brother is sitting in the next room." Kaplan waited to see if his meaning was setting in. "You think Christopher was sent here to clean up any messes?" "I don't know, but it sure seems convenient," Ron pointed out. "Well, there's one way to be sure of his motivations. Daniel can help with that," Sean said with certainty before going back in to join the others. He walked over and sat next to Daniel, then whispered something in his ear. The attorney nodded, shifting his gaze slightly to Christopher. Over time, Danny had managed to perfect his technique of scanning people to where it would only take him minutes to know pretty much everything about them. He had his mother to thank for that. When the scientist's true intentions became clear, he let Sean know he checked out. Akaike gave a small nod to Kaplan, indicating all was well. Now the real dilemma remained. Should everything Chang Li wrote down be true, their list of suspects just multiplied dramatically. There was also another factor to consider. Since Kaylee Moran was still alive, would this terrible truth even see a consequence? He got up to discuss it further with Kaplan. "Harris is clean?" he asked. "Yes, he doesn't know anything about any of this. As far as the letter is concerned, you know what we have to do," he replied. "Yeah, I know. And I also know it will probably disappear and all these murders will go unsolved because of it," Kaplan said in disgust. "Not this time," Akaike said with conviction, then took a snapshot of the letter with his phone. A uniformed officer came to the door to inform them that Nigel Rashad had arrived for questioning. Kaplan nodded, then asked his former partner how he wanted to proceed. "Once Becker is finished here, I think all of us should be present when he's questioned. I will sit on the other side of the glass and observe with the group while you two talk to him." "You think your buddy Sims can help with this guy too?" "I'm certain he can, but before you turn the letter over to the prosecutor, I want to let Laura have a look at it," Akaike told him. Kaplan nodded in agreement as a sly grin spread over his face. If there was any sort of evidence left behind, she'd find it. All she needed was access to the letter. The minute her fingers touched the paper, Sean could tell he made the right call. Her eyes lit up like a Christmas tree. "How long can I keep this?" she asked, knowing her time was limited. "Couple of hours at most," Ron told her. "I think that's all I'll need," she said, then quickly and discreetly headed out. Akaike, along with Kaplan and Becker, led the others down the hall to the interrogation room where Nigel Rashad was waiting. Upon first glance, he seemed to be a typical-looking man. His black hair, olive complexion, and brown eyes gave him an exotic flair, but this was nothing extraordinary for Los Angeles. He was dressed in a white button-down shirt with a black blazer and pants. His hands were resting palms down on the table in front of him as he sat quietly in his seat. To the average observer, he would have appeared to be one simply biding his time until freed to go. This was not the case for the small assemblies stationed behind the two-way mirror. Though none of them could quite put their finger on it, Rashad made them uneasy. Even Christopher felt a level of discomfort he could not explain. His mask of complacency instinctively changed to one of pleasantry when Becker and Kaplan entered the room. After they made introductions, they began with routine questions before delving into the real ones. Daniel began his scan almost immediately, only to run into what he called a mental block. This was a defense mechanism used by other psychics like himself to protect them from things like he was doing, thought invasion, and to keep voices of the general population at bay. He had only seen this once before, and that was with his mom. She was the one who taught him about it and how to do it. Rashad was clearly another psychic, and though Daniel had picked up on that when he came in, it did not explain the ill effect this man had on everyone. When he had encountered Anna and all the others, he had felt an instant kinship and attraction. This was not the case with Rashad. He gave off an energy so negative and foreboding that it almost swallowed you up. Find what you're looking for, counselor? Daniel nearly jumped out of his skin at the stranger's voice inside his head. Who is this? He demanded. You know exactly who this is, but if you need confirmation, look through the mirror. Rashad tipped his chin slightly, then refocused on his inquisitors. For a moment, Daniel marveled at how adept he was in his ability. He could carry on with Becker and Kaplan while conversing with him mentally without missing a beat. I suppose it's safe to say you know why you're here, Daniel said. Of course I do. So what happened between you and Lee? Did you kill him? You don't waste any time, do you, counselor? I respect a man who gets to the point, Rashad praised. Well, did you? Daniel pressed. I merely made a suggestion to him. Did you suggest he swallow his own tongue? Cross-examination is your forte, isn't it, Mr. Sims? Rashad laughed. Just trying to get to the point, Daniel answered. Tell me truthfully, are people like Chang Li a loss? What good is it to have abilities like ours if we can't use them to make a difference? Daniel paused at the sharp sarcasm in his tone. Rashad had managed to pull information about him from his mind as they were conversing. He remembered saying this very thing to Anna years ago when they formed their pact. There's no comparison between what we do and what you just did. Really, counselor, because the deep, dark places of your mind say otherwise. Okay, so tell me what Lee did to deserve death, Daniel asked, ignoring Rashad's attempted distraction. Ms. Blaine will make it all clear to you very soon. Laura, what do you know about her? I know about all of you, right down to the slightest details. I know all your secrets and all your fears. For example, your greatest fear is to lose your wife and never know what happened to her. To experience that hellish limbo of not knowing whether she is alive or dead, and if she is she suffering? Or is she happier without you? The rest in your group, they struggle to coexist with their abilities, but not you, Danny. You love yours. You love knowing everything that goes through Anna's pretty head, don't you? I would never. Don't bother denying it, counselor. We both know you've monitored her thoughts from time to time. I mean, look at her. What man wouldn't want to fuck her? Watch your mouth, Rashad, Daniel snapped. Oh, come now, Sims. It was all in good fun. I'll tell you what. Let's play with someone else. How about Dr. Harris over there? Want to see what makes him tick? No, Daniel shouted. Rashad simply laughed in response before launching a mental assault on everyone in the room. The lawyer watched in horror as his friends and colleagues were subjected to images of their worst fears coming to life. To make matters worse, they were playing on an obscene loop that circulated through each of their minds like a river of madness. They did not only suffer their own hell, they stood as helpless witnesses to each other's pain. Daniel received the brunt of the punishment because he was still able to see the effects of Rashad's game in the real world. His gift far exceeded Daniel's in every way. He had somehow managed to splice all their consciousness into many pieces and put them into any torture of his choosing. Danny watched him, carrying on with Becker and Kaplan as if nothing were happening at all. He saw his tormentor pause for a moment to give him a spiteful grin. He was enjoying their pain. His eyes darkened to black, but they had an eerie sort of glow to them. His face had a sadistic pleasure to it, a terrible sort of satisfaction that could only be achieved from sating a depraved appetite. Daniel's fear turned to rage as he watched the madman taking his joy. Well, he wasn't going to let this continue. He'd put a stop to the demented play. With all the strength he could muster, Daniel broke free from the mental chain and hurled all he had left at their tormentor. "Enough of this, you sick fuck!" he yelled. The full blast of his anger slugged Rashad like an iron fist, knocking him out of his chair. Kaplan and Becker jumped to their feet in surprise, unaware of the ticking time bomb that was now in front of them. Rashad stood up from the ground wearing a more than pissed-off expression. There was murder in his eyes, and someone was going to pay. The two detectives were asking him over and over again if he was all right, but he continued to stare intensely at the mirror. Nigel, are you all right? Can you continue?" Becker asked, trying to regain his attention. When she reached out to touch him, he recoiled and shoved her down on the floor. Shut up, you stupid bitch," he snarled. "Whoa, pal. You need to calm down right now," Kaplan ordered while absent-mindedly resting his hand on his gun. "You think your pathetic weapon will stop me, detective? Let me show you what real power is," he declared, then focused all his energy on Kaplan. Ron felt an intense pressure build up in his skull, as if his brain were expanding at an accelerated rate. The pain became so bad he fell to his knees and screamed. Becker crawled over to her partner to try and help. She had only made it a few inches before Kaplan's head literally exploded, covering her in skull and brain matter. Her body ran hot and cold as the horror of it all began to sink in. Nigel Rashad stood like a tall, growing shadow in the room. The twisted pleasure had returned to his face. The demonic child had another toy to play with. Sean, who regained his bearings, ran towards the door into the interrogation room. He was stopped in his tracks by Rashad's voice. "Don't bother, detective." "I'll send her to you," he told him. Becker was plucked up from the floor by invisible hands, then thrown through the two-way mirror. A piece of shattered glass hit her just right, cutting her jugular vein. Within seconds, she bled out in front of them. The small group viewed their new adversary in a hazy mixture of shock and rage. He merely smiled back at them with heinous joy. "The darkness is coming, my friends. It's almost upon you." With his ominous declaration made, Nigel Rashad took a step to the left and disappeared into thin air.